So is there more to life than being just happy? A lot of people are just thinking about happiness. So today we're going to watch one of these TED Talks and figure out, hey, is there more to life? What this young lady is saying, that there possibly is more to life than being happy. So let's watch this together and let's do a little bit of critiquing and learn something today. So let me back up here, rewind.
Everyone said the path to happiness was success, so I searched for that ideal job, that perfect boyfriend, that beautiful apartment. But instead of ever feeling fulfilled, I felt anxious and adrift. And I wasn't alone. My friends, they struggled with this too. Eventually, I decided to go to graduate school for positive psychology to learn what truly makes people happy. But what I discovered there changed my life. The data showed that chasing happiness can make people unhappy. And what really struck me was this. The suicide rate has been rising around the world, and it recently reached a 30-year high in America. Even though life is getting objectively better by nearly every conceivable standard, more people feel hopeless, depressed, and alone. There's an emptiness gnawing away at people, and you don't have to be clinically depressed to feel it. Sooner or later, I think we all wonder, is this all there is?
I think she started this off really strongly because the first thing, definitely, at first I thought it was like, what is she trying to get? Of course people want to be happy, right? What is she trying to get at? But she makes a good point. It's like that the chase for happiness and, doing things and success is stressful, right? So it's true. So why would that be the, what life is supposed to be like? I mean, hey, who knows, if that's the case, but that's what a lot of people definitely try to do, and we all know that that stuff comes with stress. And even like she said, suicide is increasing, and even though the quality of people's lives are getting better, and I really got interested when she said she has a graduate degree in positive psychology. So she does a little bit, scientific. So let's kind of see what else she's going to talk about here.
And according to the research, what predicts this despair is not a lack of happiness. It's a lack of something else. A lack of having meaning in life. But that raised some questions for me. Is there more to life than being happy? And what's the difference between being happy and having meaning in life? Many psychologists define happiness as a state of comfort and ease, feeling good in the moment. Meaning, though, is deeper. The renowned psychologist Martin Seligman says meaning comes from belonging to and serving something beyond yourself, and from developing the best within you. Our culture is obsessed with happiness, but I came to see that seeking meaning is the more fulfilling path. And the studies showed that people who have meaning in life, they're more resilient, they do better in school and at work, and they even live longer. So this all made me wonder, how can we each live more meaningfully? To find out...
So she's just made a big statement. Now she's making a transition to something else. So we want to touch base on this. So she's saying that there's some people chasing happiness, but what her research has shown her that people who have lived longer lives with less stress and more, I guess, at peace. I don't know if you want to say happiness, because that's what she's kind of debating against. Were that they had meaning in their life. So that meaning is what gives people that longevity, not so much happiness. So as opposed to happiness, it's the meaning. So now it's like, I mean, I could definitely see that, because a lot of people, I think like a lot of times we chase happiness, but deep down inside, it is the sense of belonging is that we're looking for. It's a sense of contributing to society. It's a sense of reaching out to others. I think like in anything we do, of course, there's like a selfish factor, but then there's always like this there's like this drive to want to be a part of something bigger, right? So, but we're always saying, I want to be happy, I want to be happy. It's kind of like we're just using that as a word, but it's a cover up. But what's the real thing that's behind it? I think that's what she's getting at, which is having meaning. So now we want to figure out what she's saying is here. So how do you live a meaningful life? Which is that's actually a tough question. Let's go check it out.
I spent 5 years interviewing hundreds of people and reading through thousands of pages of psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy. Bringing it all together, I found that there are what I call 4 pillars of a meaningful life. And we can each create lives of meaning by building some or all of these pillars in our lives. The first pillar is belonging. Belonging comes from being in relationships where you're valued for who you are intrinsically and where you value others as well. But some groups and relationships deliver a cheap form of belonging. You're valued for what you believe, for who you hate, not for who you are. True belonging springs from love. It lives in moments among individuals, and it's a choice. You can choose to cultivate belonging with others. Here's an example. Each morning, my friend Jonathan buys a newspaper from the same street vendor in New York. They don't just conduct a transaction, though. They take a moment to slow down, talk, and treat each other like humans. But one time, Jonathan didn't have the right change, and the vendor said, "Don't worry about it." But Jonathan insisted on paying. So he went to the store and bought something he didn't need to make change. But when he gave the money to the vendor drew back. He was hurt. He was trying to do something kind, but Jonathan had rejected him. I think we all reject people in small ways like this without realizing it. I do. I'll walk by someone I know and barely acknowledge them. I'll check my phone when someone's talking to me. These acts devalue others. They make them feel invisible and unworthy. But when you lead with love, you create a bond that lifts each of you up.
So I have a concern with what she's getting at here, because in one sense she's saying that belonging is the first pillar of the meaning, living a meaningful life, like that we strive to feel this belonging with others. But then she goes on to say that, like, well, but there's like a different kind of belonging. One is like belonging for people accept you for who you are, and another belonging where people accept you for like something negative or something like that, or just not exactly for who you are, but on face value. So there's, for me, that's like a little tricky because I mean, people accept people for a lot of different reasons, you know, right? So what do we? I mean, what does it mean for someone to accept you for who you are? Because there's a lot of cases like at your job or at your career, or even sometimes in your relationship. Maybe this isn't how it should be, but this is how a lot of humans, interact with each other, which is um, they accept you because of something that they're getting back, that there's some exchange of value between two human beings. Now, it'd be great, of course, there's a situation, right, in the case of your children or your siblings, not always your siblings, where there's like this like unconditional love and they accept you for who you are and a lot of stuff like that. But that seems like a very like family type of love. I don't know if it's something like a belonging that society embraces. So I don't know. That's like a little shaky to me. I think people need something a little more like, how do you make meaning out of life? A little more something that's dependable, not to count on someone to accept them for who they are, because someone might not accept someone, and that shouldn't affect you. Right, so that's my concern with this that she's getting at. But I think now she's trying to get into the thing of like, well, leading into like, how do people accept each other, and they should, like, even here herself said, oh, even I do this. Well, even if you do it, then what makes you think that that's something that is people do, that they just accept people for who they are? Is people don't always do that. So I think there's just like a little, like, I love the concept. There's like a little bit of a flaw, right? Because now people are saying, okay, that's great, but what happens when you're not accepted? So, but interesting that people want to feel belonging. But how do they get that belonging so it leads into a deeper hole? Let's continue.
For many people, belonging is the most essential source of meaning, those bonds to family and friends. For others, the key to meaning is the second pillar, purpose. Now, finding your purpose is not the same thing as finding that job that makes you happy. Purpose is less about what you want than about what you give. A hospital custodian told me her purpose is healing sick people. Many parents tell me, my purpose is raising my children. The key to purpose is using your strengths to serve others. Of course, for many of us, that happens through work. That's how we contribute and feel needed. But that also means that issues like disengagement at work, unemployment, low labor force participation, these aren't just economic problems, they're existential ones too. Without something worthwhile to do, people flounder. Of course, you don't have to find purpose at work, but purpose gives you something to live for, some why that drives you forward. The third pillar of meaning is also about stepping beyond your.
He talks about this. So this pillar of purpose. I thought that was interesting because she's saying that purpose is not just something like a lot of times people say find my purpose, but she's saying that it's something you give using your strengths, to give to others. So that's an interesting way to look at your purpose, that you find your purpose in that way. That's interesting. Let's continue.
Self, but in a completely different way. Transcendence. Transcendent states are those rare moments when you're lifted above the hustle and bustle of daily life. Your sense of self fades away and you feel connected to a higher reality. For one person I talked to, transcendence came from seeing art. For another person, it was at church. For me, I'm a writer, and it happens through writing. Sometimes I get so in the zone that I lose all sense of time and place. And these transcendent experiences can change you. One study had students look up at 200 feet tall eucalyptus trees for 1 minute. But afterwards, they felt less self-centered, and they even behaved more generously when given the chance to help someone. Belonging, purpose, transcendence. Now, the fourth pillar of meaning.
So she's going to get to the fourth pillar. Now, my concern, again, with this is that, so she had belonging. I love that one. Purpose, transcendence. The issue that I'm having with is that I think that people want happiness, and they say that because those are the things that they want. Those moments that are expressed through belonging and finding purpose, or giving purpose and finding those transcending moments, that is what people mean by the happiness. Those are the moments people crave. So in order to, when people, I feel like it's not, I don't think that it sounds kind of like a trick of words to separate happiness from those things, because that is how people, those are the meanings that people have of happiness. It's just like more of a psychological way of putting it, but that's what people mean when they say happiness. So that part is tricky, but let's continue, because now she's going to get to the fourth pillar.
I found tends to surprise people. The fourth pillar is storytelling, the story you tell yourself about yourself. Creating a narrative from the events of your life brings clarity. It helps you understand how you became you. But we don't always realize that we're the authors of our stories and can change the way we're telling them. Your life isn't just a list of events. You can edit, interpret, and retell your story, even as you're constrained by the facts. I met a young man named Emeka who'd been paralyzed playing football. After his injury, Emeka told himself, "My life was great playing football, but now, look at me." People who tell stories like this, "My life was good, now it's bad," they tend to be more anxious and depressed. And that was Emeka for a while. But with time, he started to weave a different story. His new story was, "Before my injury, my life was purposeless. I partied a lot and was a pretty selfish guy. But my injury made me realize I could be a better man." That edit to his story changed Emeka's life. After telling the new story to himself, Emeka started mentoring kids, and he discovered what his purpose was: serving others. The psychologist Dan McAdams calls this a redemptive story, where the bad is redeemed by the good. People leading meaningful lives, he's found, they tend to tell stories about their lives defined by redemption, growth, and love. But what makes people change their stories? Some people get help from a therapist, but you can.
So that part is interesting. That I like the idea that we all have the story to tell, and so when we tell a negative story, which a lot of times we can do that, like things that happen in our lives, and we'll say, "Oh, it's because I did this, and so I'm bad," or whatever, and that becomes like a narrative that you tell yourself. So you can change that, and that's how you can get meaning. What she's saying is that people who live meaningful lives oftentimes weave these better stories for themselves, right? So you should get used to telling a better story of what's happening in your life. So if you're going through a rough time, and you like she said, you might say, "Hey, I went through this situation, but when I did this, this led me to this other thing that I was really, looking for. So these stories are going to kind of be like the underpinning of your purpose and your meaning, and you create those stories. No one else can create them, right? So you make that meaning. So you don't have to, you could adapt it, and that's important. So now she's saying how do we get these better stories?
You can do it on your own too, just by reflecting on your life thoughtfully. How your defining experiences shaped you, what you lost, what you gained. That's what Emma can.
My problem with or question to this is what happens when you kind of really feel like your life is taking a wrong turn, right? Like what happens to the story there, right? If you honestly believe like, I'm not going down the right path, or like I'm trying and I'm stuck, how do people weave better stories in those kind of negative situations that they find themselves in, and maybe you can weave a better story and just say, hey, I'm stuck, but like I'm looking for this other thing and I will get there if I do XYZ. So I don't know, maybe that's a way, but I'd love to kind of talk more about like how do you weave a better story when you feel like you're in a tough situation.
Did. You won't change your story overnight. It could take years and be painful. After all, we've all suffered and we
Well,
all.
that kind of sucks. I mean, it shouldn't take years to change your story. That doesn't seem right. I would say you should be able to change your story instantly. I mean, I think you should change your story right away. I think you should change it right now. Like, just change your story right now, literally. Just change what you believe and change the narrative you're telling yourself. So that part I don't totally agree with, but maybe it gives you some solace to know that it could take a while. So don't give up on it yourself.
Struggle. But embracing those painful memories can lead to new insights and wisdom, to finding that good that sustains you. Belonging, purpose, transcendence, storytelling. Those are the 4 pillars of meaning. When I was younger, I was lucky enough to be surrounded by all of the pillars. My parents ran a Sufi meeting house from our home in Montreal. Sufism is a spiritual practice associated with the whirling dervishes and the poet Rumi. Twice a week, Sufis would come to our home to meditate, drink Persian tea, and share stories. Their practice also involved serving all of creation through small acts of love, which meant being kind even when people wronged you. But it gave them a purpose: to rein in the ego. Eventually, I left home for college, and without the daily grounding of Sufism in my life, I felt unmoored, and I started searching for those things that make life worth living. That's what set me on this journey. Looking back, I now realize that the Sufi house had a real culture of meaning. The pillars were part of the architecture, and the presence of the pillars helped us all live more deeply. Of course, the same principle applies in other strong communities as well, good ones and bad ones. Gangs, cults, these are cultures of meaning that use the pillars and give people something to live and die for.
Mm.
But that's exactly why we as a society must offer better alternatives. We need to build these pillars within our families and our institutions to help people become their best selves.
I think that was a great point. That was a great point because it just for I guess for teachers, for parents, for people who deal with others, that these 4 pillars are what people are kind of craving inside, and that any entity that gives them those 4 pillars, they will flock to. So we have to be mindful about creating these 4 pillars, giving people the opportunity to embrace this. If like I said, if you're a parent or you're a teacher or whatever, to embrace others with, because there are people looking for belonging, transcendence, purpose, and be able to give themselves a story that, some identity. Probably that's kind of what the story is. So that's probably why people join gangs or join this or that, whatever, to be connected to something. So that's definitely key to know.
But living a meaningful life takes work. It's an ongoing process. As each day goes by, we're constantly creating our lives, adding to our story. And sometimes we can get off track. Whenever that happens to me, I remember a powerful experience I had with my father. Several months after I graduated from college, my dad had a massive heart attack that should have killed him. He survived, and when I asked him what was going through his mind as he faced death, he said all he could think about was needing to live so he could be there for my brother and me, and this gave him the will to fight for life. When he went under anesthesia for emergency surgery, instead of counting backwards from 10, he repeated our names like a mantra. He wanted our names to be the last words he spoke on earth if he died. My dad is a carpenter and a Sufi. It's a humble life, but a good life. Lying there facing death, he had a reason to live: love. His sense of belonging within his family, his purpose as a dad, his transcendent meditation repeating our names. These, he says, are the reasons why he survived. That's the story he tells himself. That's the power of meaning. Happiness comes and goes when life is really good and when things are really bad. Having meaning gives you something to hold on to. Thank you.
So I think that was a great way to end it. I love what you said. So now that you tied it all together, I could see, the purpose of the name is more like being happy. I think that's kind of a little bit of clickbait because all these things are part of happiness. But if you dig deeper, I like the way she breaks it down. The happiness, I think you can say, then people's happiness really is belonging, having purpose, transcendence, and storytelling. And you should just see this through your life. I think one thing that's maybe a little tricky here is what, like she said, what do you do during the transitional periods in your life? Like it's like Steve Jobs said, you can only see, everything in hindsight. Like you can see the success in hindsight, but when you're in it, how do you identify the purpose and the story, and right, because you're kind of there in it and you don't know, like, because you can kind of look back like, oh, that was, I belong, that was the purpose, that was whatever, so you don't really tell. So I think that's key, is like how to like kind of weave it together on your journey. And if you have any suggestions or recommendations on that, please comment below and let me know. How do you weave all these things together in your current life? What do you do? How do you get belonging, transcendence when you're in the current stage of life? All right, guys, hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe, like the page for more cool videos. Bye.